Ever feel like work has like an iron grip on your brain?
Yeah.
Like it's not even enough to just do your job.
Right.
It has to be like your whole identity.
It's a pervasive feeling these
It
days.
is. And it's making me want to like dive deep into a book that tackles this head on.
Okay.
Even though it was written way back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Critique of Economic Reason by André Gorz.
What's fascinating about this book is how it remains so relevant to our modern anxieties.
Totally.
Gorz really cuts to the heart of how we got entangled with this idea of work and how it's become so all-consuming.
Okay, so unpack that for me.
Mm.
What's the core argument here that makes this book such a worthwhile read, even now?
Gorz's central point is that work, as we know it, the whole 9 yards of clocking in and climbing the ladder, defining ourselves by our jobs, it's not some eternal human truth.
Right.
It's a relatively recent invention, deeply intertwined with the rise of industrial capitalism.
So you're telling me my daily grind is basically a product of history, not some innate need to send emails at all hours. That's both relieving and slightly terrifying.
It is liberating in a way, because it means we don't have to accept this as the only way to structure our lives or our societies.
Okay.
But to understand how we might change things,
Right.
we first have to understand how we got here.
Okay, so back up a bit. How did people view work before factories and time clocks ruled our lives?
Gorz points out that in pre-industrial societies, work wasn't this separate anxiety-inducing category.
Okay.
It was often integrated into daily life, tied to community needs and rhythms of nature.
So less about individual ambition and more about collective survival.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting for us today. Because even the idea of measuring work solely by economic output,
Okay.
maximizing efficiency and profit above all else, that's a relatively recent development too.
You're talking about what Gorz calls economic rationality.
Yes.
Honestly, until I read this book, I didn't even realize that was something that could be questioned, let alone dismantled.
It's so ingrained in our thinking, right? But Gorz meticulously traces how this focus on efficiency and profit became the driving force behind our modern concept of work, often at the expense of, well, everything else.
Okay, so how did that happen? How did we go from a more holistic view of work to this kind of relentless productivity machine?
Well, to give you a concrete example from the book, Gorz talks about how early factory owners really struggled to get workers to adopt this new mentality of clocking in and out, of working for a set number of hours, regardless of whether the task at hand was completed.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine being motivated to work long hours in a factory when you're barely scraping by.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was their solution. Keep wages low, so low that people had to work incredibly long hours just to survive.
Right.
This created a system where work wasn't about fulfilling needs anymore. It was about fueling a system of ever-increasing profits.
It's grimly fascinating how this focus on profit over people,
it
seems baked into the system from the beginning.
Right. And Gorz doesn't shy away from that. He was incredibly insightful in pointing out the potential pitfalls of this system.
Yeah.
One of the major ones he highlights is worker alienation.
Right.
This wasn't just about being tired. It was about people becoming disconnected from their labor, turning into cogs in a machine. And that has huge implications for our well-being, our sense of purpose, everything.
And that's something people are feeling even more acutely now. With automation anxiety, the gig economy, it's like that alienation Gorz was talking about is spreading.
He was ahead of his time. Gorz saw this coming decades ago.
Yeah.
He argued that even the things that are supposed to free us from drudgery, like automation, they can end up creating new forms of meaningless, repetitive tasks. It's this constant tension between technology's potential to liberate us and the ways it can be used to further entrench us in this work-centric system.
It's like that promise of technology liberating us from work hasn't quite panned out as advertised.
Right.
Yeah.
And it pushes us to ask these bigger questions about how we structure society. Do we really need everyone working these full-time jobs as technology advances?
Right.
And if not, what happens to our sense of purpose, our identity, even our understanding of value?
It's a lot to unpack, but that's kind of Gorz's point, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's not afraid to shake things up and make us confront these uncomfortable truths about the role of work in our lives.
He was unflinching in his analysis, but here's what I find so compelling. He wasn't content with just critiquing the system.
Right.
He was actively seeking out a different future, a way to move beyond what he saw as the damaging aspects of this economically driven existence.
And this is where his ideas about work for oneself come in.
Right.
This idea of finding value in activities we do for their own sake, not for a paycheck.
And I think this is where critique of economic reason gets really interesting, especially for us today, because think about how much pressure there is to monetize everything.
Yes.
Side hustles, turning hobbies into gigs,
Right.
even the language of personal branding. It's all rooted in this idea that our worth comes from economic output.
It's like we're constantly being told that if you're not hustling, you're not really living.
And Gorz challenges that so fundamentally. He says, what about the things we do simply because they bring us joy, connect us to others, or make our communities better?
Right.
Things like gardening, spending time with loved ones, making art, even just puttering around in the workshop.
Yeah.
Those have value even if they don't generate a profit.
It's almost radical to think about it like that, right?
It is.
Like, oh, I'm allowed to enjoy this activity for its own sake. It doesn't have to be a side hustle.
Gorz is basically giving us permission to reclaim those parts of our lives that bring us genuine satisfaction.
Right.
Even if they don't fit into this narrow definition of productive work.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes even further,
Yep.
arguing that we need to create a society that supports this kind of living.
So not just a personal shift in mindset,
Right.
but a systemic overhaul.
Exactly. He suggests some pretty radical ideas. A guaranteed basic income, reduced working hours, more democratic control over workplaces. Now, whether those are the exact solutions is almost beside the point.
Right.
What Gorz does so brilliantly is force us to ask, what would it take to build a world where these work-for-oneself activities weren't just squeezed into the margins of our lives?
That's a question I've never really let myself consider fully.
Right.
It's like once you accept that premise that maybe, just maybe, there's another way to structure things,
Yeah.
it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
And that's what I find so exciting about Gorz.
Yeah.
He's not just offering a critique.
Right.
He's offering a vision.
Okay.
And to understand how we might move towards that vision, it's helpful to delve into how Gorz views the role of technology.
Because on the one hand, technology has fueled a lot of this always-on work culture.
Yeah.
But it's also creating the potential for automation,
Right.
for more free time, for new ways of connecting and creating.
He was very aware of that duality. Gorz saw technology as this powerful force that can either liberate or enslave us.
Okay.
He argued that we can't just be passive consumers of technology.
All
We
right.
have to be active shapers of how it's used.
So less about fearing the robots and more about figuring out how to make the robots work for us.
Exactly. Gorz believed that if automation is implemented thoughtfully and ethically,
Yeah.
it could free us from a lot of the drudgery that currently consumes our lives.
Right.
Imagine a world where instead of working 40-hour weeks, we only work 20 or even 10 hours.
Okay.
Because automation has taken over many of the tasks that currently consume our time.
It sounds almost utopian, but in a very grounded, practical way.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, look, the technology is there, the potential is there. What's missing is the collective will to imagine and create a different kind of future.
And a different set of values. Because even if we could work less, would we?
Right.
Or are we so caught up in this cycle of productivity and consumption that we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves?
That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gorz makes me realize how deeply this work-centric mentality has sunk into our collective psyche. Like, even if I got offered a 4-day work week tomorrow,
Yeah.
a part of me would probably feel guilty or even anxious about all that free time.
It's almost like we've internalized the system, haven't we?
Yeah, that's true.
And that's why I think Critique of Economic Reason is such an important read, even if you disagree with some of Gorz's proposed solutions.
Yeah.
He forces us to ask these deeper questions about what we value, why we value it, and whether those values are truly serving us.
It's a call to consciousness in a way.
Right.
It's about waking up to the ways in which our current economic system shapes not just our behavior, but our very thoughts and desires.
And it's about recognizing that the system isn't some immutable law of nature. It's something we created, and it's something we can change if we choose to.
So if we're ready to start challenging those deeply held beliefs about work, about technology, about what constitutes a good life, where do we even begin?
That's a really good question.
Gorz's book is full of these really thought-provoking ideas, but it can also feel a bit overwhelming.
Right.
It's like, okay, I'm ready for a revolution,
Yeah.
but what do I do on Monday morning?
You've hit on a key point.
Yeah,
It's one thing to have this intellectual awakening about the nature of work,
yeah.
but it's another thing entirely to translate that into tangible action.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Right.
How do we go from reading critique of economic reason
Mm-hmm.
to actually creating a world where work plays a less dominant role in our lives.
Well, I think Gorse would argue that it starts with those work for oneself activities we were talking about earlier.
Okay, the gardening, the crafting, the community organizing,
Exactly.
all those things that we often relegate to the margins of our lives.
Yeah,
They don't fit into the traditional work reward cycle.
exactly. But what if we started to see those activities not just as hobbies or ways to de-stress after a long day,
Right.
but as essential components of a well-rounded life? What if we began to value them as much as, if not more, than the work we do for a paycheck?
It's about shifting our priorities, both individually and collectively. It's about recognizing that our worth as human beings isn't solely determined by our economic output.
And it's about creating a society that reflects those values. Now, this is where Gorse gets really radical in his thinking.
Hmm.
He argues that to truly liberate ourselves from the tyranny of work,
Okay.
we need to rethink the very foundations of our economic system.
Wow.
He was a strong advocate for things like a guaranteed basic income,
Right.
reduced working hours, and worker ownership of the means of production.
These are pretty big ideas, and they often get dismissed as unrealistic or utopian.
Right.
But Gorse believed they were essential for creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to live a fulfilling life, not just those who are fortunate enough to find well-paying jobs in a system that often feels increasingly rigged against them.
And he backed up his arguments with historical examples and economic analysis, showing that these ideas are not as far-fetched as they might seem. He pointed to the successes of worker cooperatives, community-owned businesses, and alternative economic models that prioritize social and ecological well-being over pure profit.
So it's not just some pie-in-the-sky idea.
Right.
There are real-world models out there that we can learn from and adapt to our own contexts.
Exactly. And that's why I find Gorse's work so inspiring. It's not just a critique of the status quo, it's a call to action.
Okay.
An invitation to imagine and create a different future one, where work is no longer the central organizing principle of our lives, but one aspect of a more balanced and fulfilling existence.
It's about reclaiming our time, our creativity, our sense of purpose, and our connection to something larger than ourselves.
And it's a journey that begins with each of us,
Yeah.
with the choices we make every day about how we spend our time, our energy, and our attention.
It's about recognizing that we have more power than we often realize to shape our own lives and to create a world that reflects our values.
And it's about remembering that we don't have to do it alone. Gorse was a firm believer in the power of collective action,
Yeah.
in the idea that when we come together, when we share our ideas and our energy, we can create a force for change that's far greater than the sum of its parts.
It's a message that's both empowering and humbling. Empowering, because it reminds us that we have agency, that we're not just cogs in a machine, but humbling, because it reminds us that we're part of something larger than ourselves, and that real change requires collaboration, solidarity, and a shared vision for a better future.
And one of the most powerful ways we can start to build that shared vision is by challenging the dominant narratives that shape our understanding of work, of technology, and of what constitutes a good life.
It's about questioning those deeply ingrained beliefs that tell us that we have to be constantly productive,
Yes.
that our worth is tied to our income,
Right.
and that the pursuit of material wealth is the ultimate goal of human existence.
And it's about reclaiming those aspects of life that have been devalued and marginalized by our current economic system.
Right.
Things like creativity, caregiving, community involvement, and a connection to nature.
It's about recognizing that these activities have value in and of themselves, even if they don't generate a profit or fit neatly into the traditional work reward cycle.
And it's about creating a society that supports and values these activities, not just relegates them to the margins of our existence.
It's a radical proposition,
It is.
but one that feels increasingly necessary as we grapple with the challenges of our time.
Yeah.
The rise of automation, the growing gap between rich and poor, the erosion of traditional communities, and the looming threat of climate change.
Gorse's work is a call to action, an invitation to imagine and create a different future.
Yeah.
One that's more just equitable and fulfilling for all.
It's a reminder that we have the power to shape our own destiny,
Yes.
that the future is not predetermined,
Right.
and that we can create a world where work serves us, not the other way around.
And to fully grasp the transformative potential of Gorse's ideas, I think that it's helpful to delve into his analysis of how the very concept of work itself has evolved over time.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock a bit. How did people view work in pre-industrial societies? And how did that understanding differ from our modern concept of work.
In many pre-industrial societies, work was often deeply intertwined with other aspects of life. It wasn't seen as a separate, quantifiable activity that was distinct from leisure,
Right.
social life, or even spiritual practice.
Right.
People might farm for part of the year, then engage in craft production or other activities during the rest, often within the context of their families and communities. It was a more holistic approach to work, one where it wasn't necessarily seen as a burden or a chore, but as an integral part of life.
And this wasn't just some romanticized, nostalgic view of the past.
Right.
Gorz points to concrete historical examples like the guilds of medieval Europe, where skilled craftspeople took pride in their creations and work was often organized around principles of cooperation and mutual support.
Exactly. And what's particularly striking is how this pre-industrial understanding of work often encompassed a wider range of activities than we typically associate with work today.
I mean, the essential work that women have always done in the home and in their communities.
Yes.
Childcare, elder care, food preparation, gardening, crafting, all those activities that sustain life and create social bonds, but are often rendered invisible or devalued by our modern economic system.
It's a crucial point that Gorz highlights throughout his work.
Yeah.
He argues that our modern concept of work, with its emphasis on paid labor and economic productivity, has often served to devalue and marginalize the contributions of women, particularly those who perform caregiving and domestic work. Like, the system was designed to privilege certain types of work, typically those performed by men outside the home, while rendering invisible the essential labor performed by women within the domestic sphere.
And this bias continues to have profound consequences for gender equality and economic justice today. It's one of the many ways in which our current economic system perpetuates inequalities. And it underscores the importance of expanding our definition of work to include those activities that are essential for our well-being, for the care of our communities, and for the health of our planet, even if they don't generate a profit or fit neatly into the traditional work reward cycle.
Precisely. And Gorz's work provides a framework for reevaluating our values, for challenging the status quo, and for imagining a different future. One where work is no longer a source of alienation and drudgery, but a means of personal fulfillment and social contribution.
It's a vision that's both inspiring and challenging. Inspiring because it offers a glimpse of a more just and equitable world, and challenging because it requires us to confront some deeply ingrained beliefs and assumptions about the nature of work, the role of technology, and the very meaning of a good life.
And it's a conversation that's more relevant now than ever before.
Totally.
As we stand at the cusp of a technological revolution that has the potential to either exacerbate existing inequalities or to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So how do we ensure that this technological revolution leads to a more just and equitable future?
That's the question.
How do we harness the power of automation, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies to create a world where work is no longer a source of drudgery and exploitation, but a means of personal fulfillment and social contribution?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It feels like it.
And it's one that Gorz grappled with throughout his work. He believed that technology itself is not inherently good or bad, but rather a tool that can be used for a variety of purposes.
It's like a hammer. You can use it to build a house, or you can use it to break something.
Exactly.
It all depends on the intention of the user.
Exactly. And Gorz argued that we need to be more intentional about how we design and use technology, ensuring that it serves our needs and aspirations rather than dictating the terms of our existence.
So less about being controlled by technology and more about taking control of technology and using it to create the kind of world we want to live in.
Precisely. And for Gorz, that meant using technology to liberate ourselves from the drudgery of work, to create more leisure time, and to enhance our ability to connect with each other and with the natural world.
It's about recognizing that technology has the potential to free up our time, our energy, and our attention so that we can focus on those things that truly matter, our relationships, our communities, our creativity, and our well-being.
And it's about designing economic systems and social structures that support this kind of living systems that value human well-being over profit, that prioritize sustainability over endless growth, and that empower people to live meaningful lives, even if they're not engaged in traditional forms of paid work.
It's a radical vision, but one that feels increasingly necessary as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century. And it's a vision that's grounded in a deep understanding of both the potential and the pitfalls of technology, of the historical forces that have shaped our current predicament, and of the enduring human desire for meaning, purpose, and connection.
And to bring this all back to Gorz's central thesis,
Okay.
I think it's important to remember that his critique of economic reason isn't just an academic exercise.
Really?
It's a deeply personal and ethical one.
What do you mean?
Well, Gorz was writing from a place of deep concern for the human condition. He saw how the relentless pursuit of economic growth and efficiency was eroding our sense of community,
Yeah.
our connection to nature, and our very humanity. He wanted us to wake up to the ways in which this system was harming us both individually and collectively.
It's like he's saying, look, I know this system is broken.
Yeah.
I've seen firsthand how it crushes people's spirits,
Yeah.
how it alienates us from each other and from ourselves. We can do better than this. We deserve better than this.
And he believed a better world is possible.
Right.
But that creating that world requires us to fundamentally rethink our relationship with work, with technology, and with each other.
It's a call to action, an invitation to imagine and create a different future one that's more aligned with our values and aspirations as human beings.
And it's a journey that begins with each of us.
Right.
With the choices we make every day about how we spend our time, our energy, and our attention.
It's about recognizing that we have more power than we often realize to shape our own lives and to create a world that reflects our values.
And it's about remembering that we don't have to do it alone. Gorz was a firm believer in the power of collective action.
Yeah.
In the idea that when we come together, when we share our ideas and our energy, we can create a force for change that's far greater than the sum of its parts.
It's a message that's both empowering and humbling. Empowering because it reminds us that we have agency, that we're not just cogs in a machine, but humbling because it reminds us that we're part of something larger than ourselves and that real change requires collaboration, solidarity, and a shared vision for a better future.
And one of the most powerful ways we can start to build that shared vision is by challenging the dominant narratives that shape our understanding of work, of technology, and of what constitutes a good life.
It's about questioning those deeply ingrained beliefs that tell us that we have to be constantly productive, that our worth is tied to our income, and that the pursuit of material wealth is the ultimate goal of human existence.
And it's about reclaiming those aspects of life that have been devalued and marginalized by our current economic system. Things like creativity, caregiving, community involvement, and a connection to nature.
It's about recognizing that these activities have value in and of themselves, even if they don't generate a profit or fit neatly into the traditional work-reward cycle.
And it's about creating a society that supports and values these activities, not just relegates them to the margins of our existence.
It's a radical proposition, but one that feels increasingly necessary as we grapple with the challenges of our time, the rise of automation, the growing gap between rich and poor, the erosion of traditional communities, and the looming threat of climate change.
Gorz's work is a call to action, an invitation to imagine and create a different future, one that's more just equitable and fulfilling for all.
It's a reminder that we have the power to shape our own destiny, that the future is not predetermined, and that we can create a world where work serves us, not the other way around.
And one of the most compelling aspects of Gorz's argument is how he weaves together these economic and philosophical threads. He doesn't just talk about policy changes.
Right.
He challenges us to rethink our values, our assumptions about human nature, and our very understanding of what constitutes a good life.
It's a deep dive in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
He's asking us to examine not just the systems we live in, but the ways in which those systems have shaped our thoughts, our beliefs, and our desires.
Exactly. He doesn't want us to just replace one system with another.
Right.
He wants us to fundamentally change the way we relate to work, to leisure, to each other, and to the natural world.
It's like he's saying, let's not just tinker around the edges. Let's get to the root of the problem and reimagine the possibilities.
And one of the most powerful tools he gives us for this reimagining is the concept of autonomous activities. Those activities we engage in for their inherent value, not because they generate profit or conform to some external measure of success.
And this ties back to his vision of a society where work plays a less dominant role.
Exactly.
Where we have the time and freedom to pursue these autonomous activities, to cultivate our creativity, to build meaningful relationships, and to contribute to our communities in ways that go beyond just earning a paycheck.
Exactly. He wanted us to reclaim our time, our energy, and our attention from the demands of the market and to redirect them toward those things that bring us true fulfillment.
It's a radical proposition, but one that feels increasingly necessary in a world that's becoming more and more dominated by work, by technology, and by the relentless pursuit of economic growth.
And Gorz was adamant that this shift away from a work-centric society requires a fundamental rethinking of our relationship with technology.
So we're not just talking about unplugging or going off the grid.
No, it's about recognizing that technology is a tool.
Yeah.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. He argued that we need to be more intentional about how we design and use technology, ensuring that it serves our needs and aspirations, not the other way around.
So instead of technology dictating the pace of our lives,
Right.
we need to take back control and use it to create a world that works for us, not against us.
Precisely. He envisioned a future where technology is used to automate drudgery, to create more leisure time, to enhance our ability to connect with each other,
Yeah.
and to support a more sustainable and equitable way of life.
It's a vision that's both inspiring and challenging. It asks us to confront not just the external systems that shape our lives, but also our own internalized beliefs and assumptions about work, about technology, and about what constitutes a good life.
And that's what makes Gorz's work so relevant and thought-provoking, even decades after it was written.
Yeah.
He forces us to ask those hard questions,
Right.
to challenge the status quo, and to imagine a different future one that's more aligned with our values and aspirations.
Wow. So much to think about. If someone were to pick up Critique of Economic Reason today, what's the one thing you hope they would take away from it?
That's a great question. I think the most important takeaway is that our relationship with work is not predetermined.
Okay.
It's not some immutable law of nature. It's
Right.
a product of history, of social structures, of economic systems, and of our own choices.
Right.
And if we want to create a more just, equitable, and fulfilling society, we need to start by challenging those assumptions about work that have become so deeply ingrained in our culture.
It's about reclaiming our agency, about recognizing that we have the power to shape our own destiny, and about working together to create a world where work serves us, not the other way around.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a truly mind-bending deep dive.
It has.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through André Gorz's Critique of Economic Reason. It's a book that's sure to spark conversations and challenge assumptions long after you put it down.
It's been a pleasure to explore these ideas with you.
And all our listeners out there, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Gorz's vision? How do you think we can move towards a society where work plays a less dominant role in our lives? Join the conversation in the comments.